This episode of the Global Jigsaw is part 2 of a mini-series on what Iran calls the Axis of Resistance, a loose coalition of allies and proxies sworn against Israeli and US influence. Here's a reminder of what they say it stands for.
So when we talk about resistance, primarily we're talking about a catch-all term that encompasses the history of, we can say, anti-colonial struggle in the Middle East, Muqawama in Arabic and Muqawamat in Persian.
In mid-April, in a historic first, Iran launched a direct attack on Israel from its own territory, prompting jubilation on the streets of Tehran. Some of Iran's proxies chipped in from Yemen, Iraq and Syria. Iran's network of allies and proxies has shaped events in the Middle East for decades. Its potential to disrupt has been highlighted in the context of the current Gaza war. In this episode, we'll take you to Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Gaza to untangle the web of Tehran's influence operations across the region. Here's a quick snapshot before we dive into the details.
Hezbollah, it means the Party of God in Arabic, which is an indication of its guiding religious ideology. And it's often described as the jewel in the crown of the groups backed by Iran.
Iran has been said to have provided lots of support for Hamas, a marriage of convenience, of the enemy is my friend.
The Houthis are definitely backed by Iran. We've also seen reports that IRGC advisors are in Yemen.
We're talking about literally dozens of entities within Iraqi society where the army does not have the monopoly on the use of force.
The IRGC is essentially the lifesaver of the Syrian government. You can't really look at it any other way.
I'm Krassi Twig, and this is the Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring, where we look at the world through the lens of its media, getting past the narratives, the propaganda and the disinformation.
Radio Tehran. Мы не вторгались на территорию Украины.
Western countries are not the international community. That era has finished.
Hold on to your hats. It's going to be a whirlwind tour of the Middle East, starting in Iraq. Our guide is Barry Marston from our Jihadist Media Monitoring team.
It quickly gets very complicated because here we're talking about literally dozens of entities, some of which came into being in the 1980s, based in Iran, in the context of the Iran-Iraq war, some of which appeared in the 1990s, fighting Saddam Hussein from the marshes in the south. Then you have a whole new crop of groups that appeared after 2003, some of which were specifically put together to fight the Americans. Some of those groups grew their own split-off branches that went off to fight in Syria, and then they all come back together under the single coalition, which in Arabic, Al-Hashd al-Sha'abi, which is the Popular Mobilization Forces, the PMF. There are dozens of these entities, and only a very small number are strategically relevant. The Badr brigades, they're by far the biggest component within the PMF. Likewise, Asa'ib Ahl al-Haq, which appeared after 2005, purely put together to fight the Americans.
Some of these groups may go back to the Iran-Iraq war, but it was another war, decades later, that offered them a comeback opportunity.
After 2003, forces like the Badr brigades came back from Iran, where they'd been based for the last 20 years, and they weren't very popular inside Iraq. They'd been seen as fighting on the wrong side in the Iran-Iraq war.
For these reasons, the Badr brigades may not have been too popular, but they found a way to ingratiate themselves with those who had the power and the purse, the US forces in Iraq.
They actually gained influence by playing nice to the Americans, by saying that we believe in democracy, we believe in this new Iraq, allow us to play a role in politics. So the Dawa Party, the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq, the Badr Brigades, played a full role in the democratic process, and therefore from 2005 onwards were able to play a sort of dominant role within the government. The Badr brigades from then on controlled the Interior Ministry, which allowed them to flood the security forces with their own personnel.
And just like that, from exile to power in no time, with the added bonus of a fast track to the generous state budget. This had disastrous consequences for Baghdadis.
Literally thousands went straight onto the Interior Ministry payroll. By 2006, we saw the consequences of this with effectively a sectarian bloodbath in Baghdad, where death squads had been constituted. The estimated number of civilians killed on an annual basis around that period was in the range of around 35 to 40,000 people, according to UN, with Sunni extremist groups linked to Al-Qaeda killing Shia civilians, and Shia death squads were involved in killing very large numbers of Sunni civilians, which the result was Baghdad went from being a very cosmopolitan, mixed capital city to the population of Baghdad changed almost beyond recognition. There are almost no mixed districts in Iraq.
What a change in just 10 years. After the violent reshaping of internal politics in Iraq, a formidable new enemy emerged. It was so alarming, it temporarily eclipsed the old foes and forced the Iranian-backed groups to unite.
They were brought together by a fatwa by Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani. We're talking about a period, mid-2014, where a third of Iraq had very quickly come under control of the Islamic State group, ISIS. The army had pretty much collapsed.
مقاتلو الدولة الإسلامية في العراق والشام وبعد سيطرتهم على تكريت أوائل الشهر الحالي.
The ISIS was moving rapidly with nothing to stop it. So this coalition of paramilitary entities was very quickly cobbled together with the primary aim of fighting ISIS. But the entities within that coalition that persist to today, the best armed, the most influential, are almost entirely Iran-backed.
A menacing new enemy at the gates and a fatwa from the Ayatollah solidified this coalition of paramilitaries. And what happened to some of these groups after the victory over the so-called caliphate is quite startling. Their enemy diminished, but not their income.
The bizarre thing is that after the effective defeat of the Islamic State by around 2017, the budget of the PMF has effectively doubled from around 1.2 billion to 3 billion today. The force size has doubled from 120,000 to closer to 240,000 today. This force, rather than being demobilised, and in the face of a number of prime ministerial missives that mandated for the reintegration of these forces into the army, that never happened. They've continued to maintain their independent existence as separate rival forces.
And it's not just the state budget that keeps them afloat. They've tapped into various money-making opportunities.
They've entrenched themselves within Iraqi society. Scrap metal, oil smuggling, control of illegal checkpoints on Iraq's borders and inside Iraq, reaping millions of dollars. So they've moved from just being totally focused on fighting ISIS to the point where they are politically significant, economically significant, and also they have their own social and theological organisations. So these constitute a holistic movement. Obviously, a key objective was to protect that budget and ensure that they continue to exist in perpetuity.
It sounds like they've become extremely influential in Iraq. This sounds also like an own goal from Iraqi perspective, having such an influence by another country.
Many observers would tell you that the leaders of these paramilitary groups are among the most powerful figures in the country. It was the Iranian influence through very powerful figures, through their ability to lobby, to get to the point where they were actually able to play a role in choosing the subsequent government.
Surely that's not good for Iraq.
It's not good for Iraqi sovereignty. It's a very dangerous situation going forward where different parts of the country, the army does not have the monopoly on the use of force. Again, go back to that 2017 date. Diyala, Salahuddin, Ninawa, all these major provinces across the centre of Iraq, to a large degree, came under the control of these paramilitary forces. As a result of their involvement in the fight against ISIS, their progressive seizure of control, they are the key de facto forces in many of these areas. They want to get rid of American or Western forces from Iraqi soil. And that goes all the way back to 2003. They also want to be able to show to their key figures back in the Quds Force in Iran that they are significant players.
The American forces in the region may not be numerous nowadays, but they are seen as a serious obstacle to Tehran's designs. They played a key role, for example, in bringing down Iran's drones and missiles that targeted Israel this April.
You've got a very small number of American forces, in the order of about sort of 300 to 500 forces, that have been able to largely keep ISIS at bay, but also prevent these paramilitary forces that are based in Iraq, Syria and Lebanon from establishing uncontested zone of control all the way through from Tehran to the Mediterranean. Hence, you can see why they are so keen to get rid of the Americans.
How are they going about reaching that goal?
We've seen well over 160 attacks from these Iraqi entities against American bases and interests. The death toll, I believe, is still just 3 Americans. And the very low number of US casualties tells you something about the way that these groups are trying to show that, yes, we can strike the Americans with ease at any opportunity, but we're also not trying to create a firestorm for ourselves. From the Iranian perspective, they never want again to allow an administration to come into government in Baghdad that would be hostile to Iranian interests.
The groups that meant to serve Iran's interests became successful in Iraqi politics. Has that had any effect on their loyalty to the Islamic Republic?
So they should not be viewed as straightforwardly as Iranian proxies that will always precisely do what they're told and no more. They have their Iraqi grassroots supporters to worry about. They have these different competing priorities to pay attention to. So after the 2021 elections, you get this major show of force between the Sadrist movement and the political forces aligned with the PMF, contesting against each other for political power. One which is primarily acting on an Iraqi nationalist basis, and the other which many would argue is an agent of Iranian influence. Sometimes they definitely are acting at the behest of Iran, and some other times, particularly since the US killed Quds Force leader Qasem Soleimani, there's been less of a firm Iranian hand on these paramilitary factions, and we've sometimes seen them openly defying Iranian orders.
You are listening to The Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring. Next stop is Damascus, and our guide here is Amira Fatala, one of our top Middle East experts.
The IRGC is essentially the lifesaver of the Syrian government. You can't really look at it any other way. The Syrian government was faced with this unprecedented wave of dissent, which quickly spiraled into civil war in 2011. And it really looked like it could go either way. The Syrian President Bashar Assad may have been forced to leave power, or maybe he was going to find some way to hold on. And this is where Iran, and specifically the IRGC, came to his rescue. And we wouldn't see Assad still in power now with such a tight grip on power and the territorial control were it not for Iranian, but also, of course, Russian support. Russia has got very strategic naval bases in Syria that are absolutely critical positions to have in the Middle East. But Iran brought the cannon fodder. It brought these masses of fighters, which it did not just bring in from Iran, but Afghanistan and further afield, to come and fight under this cause.
Tehran seems to have put a lot of interest in keeping Bashar al-Assad in power. So what's in it for them?
If you look at Syria geographically, where it's located, it's a very lucrative spot to be and to have a close ally there. Iran operates in the region within a framework of this huge power struggle. Iran looks at countries like Saudi Arabia, especially, as a major political competitor in the region. They have different ideologies and they are competing in the same space. Iran cannot allow the Saudis to take a space if it thinks it has a chance to get in there. And not just the Saudis, but anybody, any Western ally, and certainly not Israel. So Iran, its regional policy is block the West, block Israel, and grow influence. And Syria was the perfect arena for this at this point.
And how is this vital help from Tehran portrayed in the media?
From Syrian media, you don't get any sort of detail at all. You don't know about exactly what these militias are called or where they are. You just hear about Syrian armed forces and the allied groups. The Iranian influence is portrayed as a political alliance, this partnership, very equal partners in a partnership. And they're very grateful to Iran, and Iran is very happy to be dealing with Syria.
Amira has been tracking the moves of the forces helping to solidify Iran's influence in Syria. Sometimes the clues come from unexpected sources.
You have groups like the Fatimiyun militia, that is an Iranian established militia, which comprises fighters from Afghanistan. And then you have militias like the Nujabat movement. It's actually an Iraqi group. These groups have bases all over Syria. They have a really tight stronghold in the far east of Syria, in the province of Deir ez-Zor, which neighbors Iraq. There is some overlap between the militias, and they also have some really strategic sites elsewhere in the country, including around the capital, Damascus, in certain areas where there is a strong Shia history or shrine. There's actually Iranian-backed militia presence there too. Often we know about these locations through various sources, but often we learn about them when you watch where Israel is carrying out strikes in Syria. This is to repel the Iranian influence in Syria.
Israel has carried out strikes on Iranian-linked targets in Syria for years. These hits have intensified since the start of the Israel-Gaza war. In a serious escalation, the Israelis allegedly attacked the Iranian consulate building in Damascus in April, killing at least one senior IRGC commander. That prompted Iran's unprecedented attack on Israel. In the Iranian capital, billboards sprung up with the slogan, "Tel Aviv is our battleground, not Tehran." As for Syria, more than a decade after the start of the civil war, President Assad is in a more confident position, looking for new friends to reduce his reliance on certain foreign powers.
Having secured territorial control of most of Syria, Assad has made a comeback on the regional scene. Many states in the Arab world, in the Middle East, have tried to bring him back into the fold. And the country that managed to do it was Saudi Arabia. They did a complete U-turn of their foreign policy, rebuilt diplomatic ties with Assad's government, invited him. And here is a man who hasn't been seen at these summits for over a decade, making a grand entrance and welcomed by almost everyone. This has really reduced the dependence on Iran. For Iran, that's not good, because now you have a country and it needs to be rebuilt. And having stood by him this whole time, Iran is trying to say, give us reconstruction contracts. And what they publicly say is, we would like to increase the level of economic cooperation. But Assad now has oil-rich Gulf friends, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, who are also wanting to get a look in on these reconstruction deals, and who he can turn to.
The friendship with Iran has brought some unexpected consequences. It has even altered Syria's social fabric in some places.
Some opposition media take a huge interest in the Iranian presence in Syria, and their main concern is they feel that these militias and Tehran are changing the makeup of Syria. They are bringing in people into a population who are not from this country. They are trying to instate new traditions, like religious celebrations that didn't exist in certain cities. And that is the case in some of Deir ez-Zor, where some of these militias are, where there's Sunni Arab tribes form the majority. So they really pick up these concerns of a shift in the demographics and in the culture as well.
The UN stopped counting Syria's war dead years ago at 300,000. Millions of Syrians have left their country, a result President Assad achieved with Moscow's help and with Axis boots on the ground.
The country that has lost huge numbers of people who have died and been displaced inside the country and outside the country. But Assad is rebuilding on this rubble and not looking back.
Next stop on our tour, Lebanon. It's home to Hezbollah, which is considered to be Iran's strongest proxy. Here comes Florence Dixon from our Middle East team with the background.
Hezbollah, it means the Party of God in Arabic, which is an indication of its guiding religious ideology. But in reality, it's quite a few different things. It's a paramilitary group with military capabilities that far exceed those of the Lebanese army. It's also a hugely influential political force, especially in southern Lebanon, with seats in parliament and ministers in the cabinet. And it's also a key provider of social services, primarily for Lebanese Shia communities, provides things such as healthcare, education. So it's deeply embedded in Lebanese society. It's often called a state within a state. It's very open about its ties and its funding from Iran, and it's one of the frontline actors in the so-called axis of resistance. It shares a border with Israel, which obviously gives it huge prominence. And it's often described as the jewel in the crown of the groups backed by Iran.
Let's look into how Hezbollah, this powerful Shia political and militant group, came about. It's been proscribed as a terrorist group by the Arab League, the US, UK and EU, among others. Its genesis and rise are tightly connected to Israel.
Hezbollah itself was formed in 1982, so in the midst of the Lebanese civil war and in the wake of the Israeli invasion and occupation of Lebanon, and at a time when the 1979 Iranian revolutionary spirit and teachings of Ayatollah Khomeini were being widely felt across the region. If we go to Hezbollah's official launch in 1985, it said its objectives were to obliterate Israel from existence, get rid of the US and French troops from Lebanon, so very much branding itself as a resistance to colonial forces in Lebanon. But it was also a moment of huge anger and disillusion among the population of southern Lebanon, which is majority Shia and suffered decades of marginalization from the Lebanese state. Iran really capitalized and invested at this very opportune moment on all the anti-US sentiment in Lebanon, the anti-Israel sentiment, this widespread disillusion, and that's what gave Hezbollah such momentum. And you see them grow in ascendance in a relatively short period of time, and that's due to this kind of image of having quite a disciplined nature, this air of legitimacy as well that they get from their religious credentials.
Discipline and spirituality alone might not have been enough for such a breakthrough were it not for the money and the firepower gifted by the Islamic Republic.
And then they have this more material support from Iran as well, both financial and in terms of military aid, and also another aspect of their geographical position. They're next to Syria, so that's allowed the passage of weapons and other materials from Iran to Lebanon. Syria's also allowed key meetings to be hosted in Damascus, and more recently Hezbollah fighters gained combat training in the Syrian war, where it also developed special forces.
Iran's material support has been a lifeline for Hezbollah all along. But there was another factor that helped the group remain powerful, and it all goes back to the end of the civil war in Lebanon.
The key moment is the 1989 with the Taif power sharing agreement at the end of the Lebanese civil war, which called for the disarmament of all Lebanese militias, with the exception of Hezbollah, because Hezbollah argued that it should be allowed to continue fighting Israel because Israel still occupied 10% of Lebanon. Their popularity rose even further in 2000 when Israel withdrew from southern Lebanon and Hezbollah got most of the credit for that.
Next step for the Party of God was to enter the big league of politics.
And then in the 1990s, it started to become an influential political player. It won its first parliamentary seats in 1992, and since then it's really been embedded in the political structure of Lebanon. The Shia community and Hezbollah constituencies have to a great extent been shielded from the country's numerous crises, and on many of these occasions Iran sent weaponry, it sent aid for reconstruction, it sent medical supplies and even subsidised foodstuffs. So these communities could bounce back quite quickly. There's a 2019 report by the US State Department which said that in recent years, Iran's annual financial backing to Hezbollah was estimated at $700 million. So the overwhelming majority of its budget comes from Iran.
With all this at their fingertips, how popular are they?
How Hezbollah is viewed in Lebanon is interesting because it's very divided. And I think that you could probably say that around half the population view it as a problematic political and military force and blame it for, widespread corruption. The Beirut port blast, for example, Hezbollah is seen as obstructing all of the investigations into that's caused huge public anger and anguish, and also being responsible for various kind of political malpractice and assassinations and persecution of its opponents. In southern Lebanon, it's gained a lot of public support. Some members are given discount cards to go to the supermarket.
Hezbollah is frequently portrayed in the West as Iran's proxy, but that's not how it sees itself.
Hezbollah doesn't view itself as a proxy, and they would say that would be a Western Orientalist view. By their accounts, they're very much a grassroots organisation. It's a huge military force. It overshadows Hamas in terms of its military arsenal. Experts predict that the group has in the range of about 150,000 missiles and rockets at their disposal that can hit anywhere in Israel. Hezbollah has a very effective and vocal media machine. It has its own TV station, Al-Manar, and it will carry all the official media and statements. So it will carry Hassan Nasrallah's 3 to 4 hour speeches. And then there's a wider network of pro-Hezbollah outlets, of quite popular Lebanese-based pan-Arab TV station called Al Mayadeen. You have more influential and highbrow outlets. So you have Al Akhbar, which is a really influential equivalent of a broadsheet newspaper.
Florence compared Hezbollah's military arsenal with that of Hamas. So let's look into that group now with Shayna Oppenheimer from our Jerusalem team.
Hamas is actually an acronym for the Islamic Resistance Movement. So it emerged from an earlier Gaza-based group called Mujama al-Islamiyah in 1989. And this is at the beginning of the first Intifada, or Palestinian uprising. And it's really a local offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. And unlike some of the secular groups that were really popular at the time, like Fatah or the Popular Front, Hamas really promotes itself as the defender of Palestinian nationalism, but it's through an Islamist lens. And then in 1989, it carries out its first attack in Israel. And then it went on to carry out quite a few of those attacks, which really picked up during the Second Intifada in the early 2000s. Now, a key moment for the group was in 2006. Israel had already pulled out of Gaza, and Hamas decided for the first time to participate in legislative elections. And they won. And then a year later, they seized power of Gaza after a short round of armed fighting with its rival Fatah. So they also have to start providing civil services for some 2 million residents.
Just like the other members of the so-called Axis of Resistance, Hamas's declared enemy is Israel. And just like Hezbollah, it's been proscribed as a terror group by a number of states.
They're quite clear in calling for the destruction of Israel. This destruction needs to happen through jihad, through armed resistance. In 2017, they actually revised their charter. They did tone down on some of their language. They did accept the idea of a Palestinian state being established along the 1967 borders, but they didn't really mention anything about acknowledging an Israeli state. Instead of speaking about Jews, they started to speak about the Zionists. And the last thing that's really important to keep in mind when we're talking about Hamas is that it is a designated terror group, according to the UK, according to the US, and many other foreign governments.
We've looked into the connection between the Iraqi Shia groups and the Islamic Republic, Assad's friendship with Tehran, and Hezbollah's anchor to the mothership. The spiritual bond tying Hamas to Iran, on the other hand, is not obvious, as they are on opposite sides of the sectarian divide.
Hamas has always been a kind of outlier in this axis of resistance because Hamas is a Sunni group. The Hamas-Iran relationship has always been a marriage of convenience, of the enemy is my friend. Of when Hamas started carrying out attacks, which was very soon after it was created, you could argue that it has always worked in favor of Iranian interests.
Hamas has been running the Gaza Strip since 2006, which means it has some income in the form of taxes. What else does it rely on?
A U.S. State Department figure says that Iran provides Hamas with about $100 million annually, which is quite significant. But there are also allegations that Qatar provides payments on a regular basis to Gaza. Where that's going is up for debate, but a lot of it does go towards reconstruction efforts, helping pay civil servants, keeping power plants running, and there were even times where they were distributed as cash payments to civilians. And what's actually really interesting about these payments is that for a long time they were supported by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who saw these financial backing of Hamas by Qatar as a way of keeping Hamas at bay. He saw them as a group that maybe wasn't really capable of causing significant damage to Israel and maybe some kind of containable nuisance that we can have on our border. And it was also a way for Netanyahu to ensure that Hamas was strong and that it maintained rivalry with the Palestinian Authority. And this was also a way of taking off pressure on Israel to negotiate with the PA for some kind of permanent resolution.
It seems that the cash flow from Doha didn't bother the Israeli government much. Quite the opposite.
We would actually see Qatari officials routinely brought into Gaza with the help of Israeli intelligence officials with suitcases of cash, millions of dollars in cash. Beyond Qatar, Hamas has ties with Turkey, who has been said to fund Hamas. And we've also seen reports that there is a Hamas network of secret companies that are managing about $500 million of investments in companies from places like Turkey and Saudi Arabia. And then, of course, Hamas also raises its own funds through cryptocurrency and back-channel money laundering. It's also worth reminding people that at the end of the day, they are a designated terror group, they are a militant group, but they are still a governing entity and they do collect taxes.
The other Palestinian territory, the West Bank, is also worth looking into in the context of this story. Its towns are governed by Hamas rivals, the Palestinian Authority, which is led by Mahmoud Abbas and his secular Fatah party. Security in the territory is mainly under the control of Israel.
What's really interesting, and we've seen this in the past 2 years, is the rise of local armed groups in the occupied West Bank. They've carried out quite a lot of attacks on Israeli soldiers, and it kind of set up this cycle of violence where, in response to a series of deadly attacks in Israel, Israeli forces started operating more regularly in the occupied West Bank. We've seen raids where as many as 15 people have been killed. A lot of these armed groups are affiliated with Hamas, they're affiliated with Islamic Jihad, some of them more loosely than others. And Israeli officials have been quite clear, especially Netanyahu, in saying that the violence in the West Bank and the activities of the armed groups has been financed by Iran.
For months, Yemen's Houthi rebels have been waging war against commercial ships. Their campaign was deadly on Wednesday, when a missile killed several seafarers.
Another group that got frequent name checks in the news for their ability to disrupt an important shipping route in the Red Sea are the Houthis. They are the next on our list of Axis members, and we have just the person to talk about them, our Yemen expert Sumaya Baksh.
The Houthi rebels are an armed group based in the far north of Yemen, in the Northern Highlands, in Sa'da. That's their stronghold, although they now control the capital Sana'a and most of Yemen's north, which is where most of the country's population live. In terms of their declared aims, since the outbreak of the Israel-Gaza conflict, through their attacks on ships in the Red Sea, they say that they're aiming to exert pressure on Israel to halt its military campaign in Gaza.
For those with their eyes on the Middle East, the Houthis are not a new phenomenon.
The Houthi movement was established in the 1990s, but they really came to prominence in 2014 when they came down from their northern stronghold during protests against fuel price hikes, came into the capital Sana'a and seized control. And that was really the beginning of the war in Yemen. Their seizure of the capital eventually forced the president at the time, Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi, to flee abroad. And then the following year, Saudi Arabia launched a military campaign against the rebels, who they viewed as a proxy of Iran. They both belong to the Shia sect of Islam, and the Houthi rebels belong to the Zaydi minority in Yemen. And ideologically, they are both staunchly anti-West, staunchly anti-Israel. The Houthi slogan is "Death to America" and "Death to Israel."
And what is the Yemeni government's perception of the Houthi movement?
The Yemeni government sees the Houthis as a proxy of Iran. They describe them as a terrorist militia.
So let's talk about the Houthis' relationship with Iran. What do they say about it?
The Houthis are very open about the fact that they have good relationship with Iran. They describe it as a brotherly relationship, but they are also very emphatic about the fact that they do not take orders from Iran. However, the US and Saudi Arabia say that Iran has been arming the Houthi rebels, providing them with ballistic missiles and drones, although both Tehran and the Houthi rebels deny this. Now, they're perhaps being more explicit about they don't take orders from Iran, although we have seen reports that IRGC advisors and Hezbollah advisors are present in Yemen and helping the Houthis with their maritime operations.
On the 7th of October 2023, thousands of Hamas militants launched an attack on Israel, which prompted the current Gaza war. It was the deadliest attack targeting Israelis since the inception of the Jewish state. At least 1,200 Israelis were killed and more than 200 people were taken hostage. As this brutal war in Gaza enters its 7th month, the Hamas-run health ministry says more than 33,000 Palestinians have been killed. Most of the population has been displaced, and many are facing famine, according to the UN. For the Houthis, this was a moment of such significance, they decided to take matters into their own hands, and did so by shooting missiles at ships at the Red Sea, demanding an end to the Gaza war.
Shipping companies are bracing for weeks of disruption to their normal routes after several of them announced they would avoid passing through the Red Sea.
They gained global visibility and huge popularity on social media.
The Houthis have a very wide-ranging media messaging machine. Since the outbreak of the Israel-Gaza conflict, we've seen a lot of senior Houthi officials on social media gaining large followings with this messaging of how the rebels are the defenders of the Palestinians in ways that many Arab governments, they say, have failed the Palestinians, particularly as some Arab countries have normalized relations with Israel. We also see, for example, on Houthis' main media outlets, the Al Masira TV channel, widespread coverage of these mass protests of tens of thousands of people out in the streets. Chanting the Houthi slogan, "Death to Israel, death to America," holding up the Palestine flag, holding up the Yemeni flag, and really positioning themselves as defenders of this cause that is important for all Arabs, Muslims, defending the right of Palestinians to have their own independent state.
There have been suggestions that the Houthis might have their own reasons for waving the Palestinian flag.
We've seen reports that there's been an increase in recruitment to the Houthi movement, but equally critics of the Houthis say that their stated aim of defending Palestinians, there's a lot of skepticism around that, and critics of the Houthis see them as taking this stance for their own personal gains to gain political standing.
The Houthis are not the only manifestation of the tectonic impact the Gaza war has had on the region. The conflict has brought to the surface old cracks in the Tehran-led alliance. Back to Damascus with Amira.
When the Gaza war began, all of what Iran would call the axis of resistance got behind the message that the Palestinian factions are confronting Israel. There's a small divergence. The Syrian government has had huge tensions with Hamas in Gaza. And that's because when the uprising broke out in Syria in 2011, Hamas supported it. And yet Hamas and Damascus are supposed to be allies under the Iranian so-called axis of resistance. Syria expelled Hamas from Damascus in 2012. And Hamas has slowly been trying to rebuild that relationship, and they came to visit Damascus. State media reported it. All the Palestinian factions that visited, last on the list was Hamas, arguably the most powerful faction. And this is where you read into the narrative. To see this tiny little crack in the facade, that tension still exists with Hamas, I think that tells you that Iran can only hold these groups together for so long.
In the last few decades, Syria has been the temporary home for a substantial Palestinian population, mainly in and around the capital Damascus. There seems to be a disconnect between the declared support for the Palestinian cause and the treatment of Palestinian refugees in Syria.
Yarmouk camp is this Palestinian camp, and during the civil war, the pictures of the devastation in Yarmouk actually became some of the best known, devastating images of complete rubble all pouring down a street. There's nothing left. This is an incredibly densely populated area with Palestinian refugees who have been there for decades. Never got a house in Syria, never got anywhere to really settle. That was the Syrian government approach.
Since the start of the current war in Gaza, Hezbollah, the non-state actor with the largest military potential in the region, has been regularly firing barrages of rockets into Israel from Lebanon. Yet it has so far held off from making any major military moves. Florence has been watching the tense situation.
They've been issuing claims of responsibility for their attacks on northern Israeli military sites since October, saying very much that this is in support of the Palestinian people in Gaza.
من يريد منع قيام حرب إقليمية والخطاب للأمريكيين.
The leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, has said that Hezbollah has 100,000 forces at its disposal, which is a widely disputed figure, but it's definitely in the multiple tens of thousands. Hezbollah have made it very clear that they don't want a full-scale war or a full-scale escalation on that Lebanon-Israel border. And you even see it in pro-Hezbollah media. They'll make it quite clear that Hezbollah is carrying out a controlled escalation, and they're very careful for it not to get out of hand.
So Hezbollah hasn't made any sudden moves for now. In contrast, for Hamas, the 7th of October attack seemed to be all about rattling the status quo, at a time when they felt the Palestinian cause was undermined by regional powers aiming to normalize ties with Israel. Initially, Iran was blamed for the brutality of Hamas in that attack. Shayna was looking for clues.
The Wall Street Journal reported that Iran did help Hamas plan its October 7th attack during meetings with officers from the Revolutionary Guards and representatives of other backed groups. Iran has denied involvement, and Hamas has been clear about saying that this was their own initiative. But we do also know from other reporting that Hamas wanted to spark some kind of regional war. They saw more Arab states move to normalize relations with Israel, and they wanted to do something that put the Palestinian cause back at the forefront of people's minds. And the hope was that the October 7th attack might start a regional war, that Hezbollah maybe would have gotten more involved. Perhaps more Iranian-backed groups would have gotten more involved. And as we know, that didn't really play out in that way.
Israel launched the war against Gaza with the declared aim of rooting out Hamas. On a different front, the social media one, Hamas seems to have the upper hand.
They've really relied on Telegram over the past few years, and significantly since the start of this war. That's where they post these very slick military-style videos showing off their capabilities and fighting with Israeli soldiers. And it's really an attempt to show that they're still in Gaza, they're still putting up a strong fight, and they're still having some kind of battle successes. They also talk about what they say are crimes by the occupation. They mention the dire humanitarian situation there, the lack of food, water, medicine, and basic needs. And in addition to blaming Israel for this, they actually put a lot of blame on the rest of the world for allowing this to happen.
Slick PR videos and social media campaigns accompanied by images of the immense suffering of the Palestinians seem to have enhanced Hamas's appeal.
A lot of people are saying that Hamas is really an idea, and you can't really destroy an idea. And if history shows us anything, it's that the dire humanitarian situation people are experiencing in Gaza right now, this is exactly the recipe for further radicalization, because people don't have a lot to lose. Whenever this war ends and however it ends, people are going to be in a very bad situation. A lot of Gaza is destroyed. People are going to be sleeping in tents for a very long time. There is a lot of sentiment that Iran will be able to exploit.
It sounds like there's a way Iran could benefit from the hardship in Gaza. So where would an internationally mediated long-term solution to the Palestinian issue leave Tehran?
The West and the US has been really pushing for the Palestinian Authority to have some kind of governing role in the Gaza Strip, and even possibly pushing for international recognition of a Palestinian state. And if that happens, that would be a big blow to Iran, because the Palestinian cause has always been central to Iran's excuse for its regional proxies and its axis of resistance, not only against Zionism, as they say, but also against imperialism and the West. I don't think Iran would be too happy with some kind of outcome of the war that could potentially lead towards a more permanent solution.
On the 12th of April, Iran launched an attack on Israel with more than 300 drones and missiles from its own territory. This put the world on high alert. Let's bring back Barry Sadid, our Iran expert we spoke to in part 1, to bookend this mini-series with his analysis of the future of the so-called axis of resistance.
I want to draw attention to the historical circumstances that have enabled the Axis to thrive in Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and so on. These groups were not responsible, say, for the US invasion of Iraq or Lebanon's civil conflict and the Israeli occupation. What the IRGC were able to do was to exploit instability made by others to create enduring alliances and proxies in these weakened states. Just so, Iran is not the primary mover of the ongoing conflagration in the region. As Israel wages war in Gaza, we're already seeing flashes of unrest in countries like Egypt and Jordan, whose authoritarian governments are caught between public rage over the devastation of Gaza and their apparent inability or unwillingness to bring about a ceasefire. These tensions have only increased with Iran's latest assault exposing Israel's regional support, with Jordan, for example, openly shooting down Iranian drones and missiles destined for Israel. And this is in the context of Jordanian protests for Gaza, and even public offers by Axis members to arm Jordanians willing to take on Israel. The Axis undoubtedly has strategic depth, thanks to its religious and ideological core. But as for its future, as long as these crises and tensions persist, the Islamic Republic and its allies will have the space to grow and thrive.
Thank you to all our speakers, Barry Sadid, Barry Marston, Shayna Oppenheimer, Amira Fatala, Florence Dixon, and Sumaya Baksh. This episode of The Global Jigsaw was produced by Krista Shaturi and hosted by me, Krassi Twig. The sound engineer is Nigel Dix and our editor is Judy King. As always, thank you for showing an interest. And if you find this pod enlightening, do recommend us to your friends.